All right, we are back at the IDW booth, IDW Top Shelf booth, and I have a co-questioner with me, and we're talking with Ben Wickey, and he's going to be talking about the witch trials. But before we do that, can you briefly tell us about your, comic book experience as both a reader and creator?
My experience is very slim. I mean, I haven't been in the business for that long. For about 10 years, I've been working on this book called More Weight about the Salem witchcraft trials. I've been an illustrator before that. And other than that, I've just been doing animation and things like that. But I was halfway through doing this book, More Weight, and I sent the first half to Alan Moore. Really, not because I was doing the comic, but because Giles Corey, the main character of More Weight, is from Northampton, which, if you know anything about Alan Moore, you know that's his number one. You know, it's where he lives. It's where Jerusalem takes place, and so much. And Giles Corey is also mentioned in books like Jerusalem and Providence and things like that. So I knew that Alan knew that Giles Corey came from there, but because More Weight is so much centered around Giles Corey's gruesome death in 1692, being pressed to death as it was, because so much of what I was trying to do with my book is to show that this was really one of the first documented protests in American history. I feel like that was something that would, entice him, or into, reading just the first half of it or something like that. He did, and then he chose me for the Bumper Book of Magic, the Buddhist Bumper Book of Magic. So he plucked me pretty much out of complete obscurity. I had only done some comic work, but mostly illustrative work for the illustrated Vivian Stanshall by Kai Longfellow. I worked with Vivian Stanshall's widow. She was amazing, and I had done a Vincent Price cookbook for the UK called Supper with the Stars. So I had some published work, but nothing,
Were you a reader growing up, or?
Oh yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. You're asking me about that.
No, you're asking about both.
Oh,
so,
okay.
Yeah, that was perfect. Also, are you also into comics as a fan?
Very, voracious comics reader, lover of Calvin and Hobbes and Peanuts. Not so much the superhero stuff. I read a lot of the Belgian stuff like Tintin and Asterix and things like that. Will Eisner's Moby Dick.
Wow. That's not usually what people go to with Will Eisner, you know what I mean? That's awesome.
Well, I used to, because I'm from New England, so, the idea of Moby Dick as a book, I used to watch the movie versions of it and everything like that. As a little kid, and I would see, Moby Dick on the shelf, and it's this thick.
Yeah.
And then my dad gave me Will Eisner's copy, Will Eisner's, adaptation of Moby Dick, which blew my mind at such a young age. I'm like, oh my gosh, you can do this with comics. It's not like you can condense everything in Moby Dick into one book, but you can do your best.
Yeah.
You tell the story at least.
So I'm curious with More Weight, it's a gigantic book.
Yeah.
And you tell the story over 3 time periods. But I'm curious, you could have simply just told a story of the witch trials and maybe had it be half as long and probably finished it in 5 years instead of 10 years. So what was it that sort of was your driving purpose in trying to make it such this big, momentous, multi-layered story?
I really wanted to show Salem in at least 3 centuries, and to show the entire aftermath of what happened. Really, to show that this thing. Usually if you see a movie or TV show about the Salem witch trials, like The Crucible or any of the, the movies or miniseries or things like that, it always begins and ends in 1692. It ends with the last people, getting hanged and people getting sad and going home, and that's the end of it. But I really wanted to do a book that shows no, this had consequences. This meant something, and it still means something. It's relevant. And I'm from that area of New England. All my friends growing up lived in Salem. I used to go there. I only grew up, 30 minutes away from Salem. And so I, like a lot of people, would be walking around going, okay, it's Halloween here every day. It's my favorite holiday. It's my favorite city. But there's this weird thing that just doesn't really make sense to me. You know, like when you realize that none of this Halloween stuff would be going on if 25 innocent people had died.
Right.
19 men and women hanged, but one man, Giles Corey, pressed to death, and 5 people dying in jail, including a newborn baby. Like that to me was just very weird, and I kind of wanted to have a Salem book that shows 1692, but talks about what it means, and to show that history doesn't happen in a vacuum. It happens in our backyards, and we think of the Salem witch trials in our heads as kind of a New Yorker cartoon. We think of log cabins and people with pitchforks and torches, and it's almost this kind of mythologized thing that doesn't exist, but it did. It was a real atrocity that deserves to be told. This is a pop culture medium, comics, and I'm not a historian. I was telling other historians this. I'm not a historian. I'm just a cartoonist who cares.
Kind of following that up, not being a historian and doing the research, was there anything that you learned while you were researching that maybe stood out for you, or made you think of something in a different way?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't set out to do. I certainly didn't set out to have the end of the book being kind of the polemic that it kind of turned into. But I just started this book with an inquiring eye. I began it just curious, and I didn't set out to prove any point correct or to. I didn't come in with any preconceived notions or things like that. I just wanted to research and write and draw as I went along, knowing that, and I thought that was the wrong way of doing it, but then I saw an interview with David McCullough where he was talking about how that is the perfect way of doing it. You write as you research, so that you are writing from a point of view of curiosity. You're asking questions. I was just surprised at the whole aftermath. I was surprised at how long it took for these people to be exonerated, how people just went out of their way to keep this story controversial. Like, don't talk about that because they might have actually been witches. We don't want to talk about this because we don't want to offend. We don't want to put up a memorial to these people 200 years later in 1892 because we don't want to offend Mr. Putnam down the street because we don't want to remind him about how his family, accused 40 people. Right. And so this thing was just, you just see the story about people running away from the past. And I think we do, I think Gore Vidal was right. We do live in the United States of amnesia. Right. It's not a rosy moment in American history. And my question throughout the whole thing was like, okay, if this is all superficial, if I'm getting worked up over nothing, why are we still running away from the facts? Right. If this is something that people can't face still 330 years later. Yeah.
Right. And is that the main point that you would like people to take away from the book, or?
Yeah, I just seen so much, it had been sort of trivialized, I think. And I think it's good that we humanize history and we understand, like, yes, these people had buckles on their shoes. Yes, they worshipped and they lived in different ways that, we probably couldn't wrap our heads around today. But to show that, these poor people who expected to see the end of the year, and they didn't. Right. And this is a thing, and witch hunts also, a thing that really struck me is that witch hunts are still happening. They're happening in India and Africa right now, and people are being dragged out of their homes and lynched in Nigeria for the same reason that they were in the Western world, and it's not a case of, oh, well, that's just the way they do things over there. No, that's how, wherever you have great change and anxiety and socioeconomic pressures and, strife of any kind and factions, you're going to get people going the easiest route of disposing of people that they don't like, which is demonizing them and, accusing them of consorting with the invisible world. It's more relevant than we would like to think.
Absolutely.
So what is the next 10-year project involve for you?
I'm telling people, oh God, no, I'm having fun now. I'm doing a kind of American folk horror type of book. I was telling people it's kind of a cross between Antiques Roadshow and Nosferatu. I'm having fun. It's going to be short and sweet.
Love that.
Yeah.
Excellent.
But still a lot of research too. So
Any other questions, Mike?
I think we're good.
So where can people find you online if you're online, or where can they find your other stuff?
I'm on Instagram. You can keep in touch and see my different. I'm going to be in Newburyport, Massachusetts on the 18th, giving a talk and signing books, and I'm going to be in London on December 5th, I believe, at Swedenborg House. I may be joined through Zoom with Alan Moore. I'm not sure, but it's fingers crossed. You know, he's very busy.
Awesome.
Thank you so much.
All right. Well, thank you very much. And is this your first time to New York?
It's not my first time in New York, but my first New York Comic Con.
Oh, that's what I was meant to say. Yeah.
It's very different from the other cons. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
guys so much. Appreciate it.
Awesome.
Was that all right? I wasn't able to much.
No, not